I was married to a sociopath and I was abused for 2 decades. And this is how I got to know all about trauma bonding, the trauma bonding process. But more important than that, I got to learn how to break free from it. And my life just transformed really quickly. But I had to create a plan to do this. And in this video today, I'm going to share with you the steps that I took to break this spell of trauma bond and abuse forever. I hope it will help you as quickly as it helped me. Hello, I'm Sarah and I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and relationship coach. But more important, I'm a survivor and a thriver after narcissistic abuse myself. And I help my clients attract great relationships and learn to create a happy life on purpose after trauma. So I remember this time of my life vividly. And the moments, days and weeks after I realised that I had been experiencing abuse from a sociopathic ex. It felt like I'd woken up into a living nightmare. And at some level, though, I realised that this was also the moment where if I thought about it really carefully, I could actually create a happy life on purpose. And that's what I've been doing ever since. It was weirdly liberating. And looking back, I believe I was divinely guided in this, and that's why I've been helped so much on my path. So one day, when I'd just had about as much as I could take of the stress and the trauma of suddenly finding out about a secret scam that my ex had been involved in, it's not an exaggeration to say that I'd really had enough of what I was able to endure. And I was very close to not living at all. It was definitely my breakdown moment. But in that quiet moment, I felt that life just kind of stopped. It was kind of like became suspended. And I felt a wave of peace and calm. And I also felt a lot of spaciousness, and it felt so safe. In fact, I felt safer than I ever had done in my whole life. And recalling that moment now is making me feel so much appreciation and gratitude, because it was in this moment that I heard a voice talking to me. And it was a very gentle but clear voice. And I'm not even sure I know who the voice belonged to, but it was definitely there. And it said to me, "Sarah, you're not meant to be living like this. You're meant to be happy in this lifetime." And then I just sat there enjoying the sensation of peace, calm, and this kind of sense of relief. And I just let these feelings wash over me. And I don't know how long I sat like that for. I don't think it was that long. I'm not sure. So what had just happened? I'm still amazed by it today. But maybe it was my imagination. And looking back and thinking about those times, I believe that I was being guided by a higher power. Now, up until this time of my life, I wasn't really religious or spiritual in any way whatsoever. But after this moment, I did develop a sort of sense of spirituality. So maybe it was something like I was being guided by my higher power, maybe my soul, maybe my inner being, maybe God. So after this moment, my life just changed. And the things I needed to know and information just came to me. Professional support came to me. And it was quite incredible how fast this all happened. The sociopath got removed from my life overnight. And just to make sure, a restraining order was put on against him. He wasn't allowed to come anywhere near me. And then what happened? Oh yeah, then I got a lovely house to live in. And I was able to leave and move into a really nice house. I got a new car. I got a new job. And it sounds easy when I list it like that, but it's like things just magically unfolded. And I'm thinking about it now, it was kind of like miracles. one after another, all working in my favour. And I suppose it sounds easy when I list it. Oh, got a new car, got a new job. It wasn't actually that easy. The changes happened really, really fast. And it took some work and focus to get through it nevertheless. But going back to that moment of deep knowing, a few things happened that helped me break the trauma bond to the abuser, and to break the trauma bond and the cycle of abuse. So I'm kind of talking about it now. I'm going to explain the exact steps that I took to get the break I needed, because I hope it will help you also. So, I'm sorry if you found yourself sort of searching out video content like this, but I'm glad you found this video, because there's lots of people explaining about trauma bond, but there's nobody who can explain exactly what they did to break free from it. And that's why I hope this video is going to be valuable for you. If that is the case, if you could comment, that would be great in the comments below. So I honestly believe that everything happens for a reason. So I want to document what happened, especially in these early stages of separation from the sociopathic narcissist, so that it can be replicated by anyone else who also needs this support at this time. And one thing I did learn is that if you are open to support from life, then support comes to you. If you can somehow trust the process, and I know that's a big ask, because when our trust has been broken to the degree that it has after decades of narcissistic abuse, our trust has been broken so many times over and over again. That's tough. So I'm not prescribing here exactly. So these are just the steps I took, and if it can inspire you as well, I'm really happy about that. So everybody's on their own individual journey, but hopefully this content will resonate with you and will inspire you. So back to the process. Here's the first thing that happened. And the other steps that I took naturally flowed from this first one. So the first thing that happened was I was able to create distance and stop reacting. And the feeling I got when I heard my guidance was so good. I felt so safe. I felt so supported. And I was in this sort of lovely calm space. And I wanted to keep replicating that. I needed to feel safe and calm more than anything else. And what I discovered was that I could replicate this feeling every day, just simply by meditating. It's crazy, isn't it? I just didn't know what it was called at the time, although it didn't take me long to find out. And I became fascinated with the process, and I was eager to learn all about it, to the extent that I actually booked myself into the local Buddhist sanctuary so I could learn to do it properly. But I later realised I had actually been doing it properly all along. So looking back now, this process actually saved my life. And I was able to create some kind of emotional distance from the abuser, even though I was still living with him at the time. And it was like a buffer zone. And it was like a boundary of safety. So I was able to stop reacting to all of his hooks and baits, because this is what abusers do. And they perpetuate the cycle of abuse by baiting and hooking you in various ways. So what happened was, because it was an actual very sudden difference in how I was responding to this person, he realised I was different. For all the lack of awareness that narcissists have, they are able to assess their targets quite well. And he knew I was different, and it really, really spooked him. And looking back, I think it kind of sent him into a bit of a panic. But he was a very sort of cool, calm, strategic person, so it was all a bit strange, really. But maybe you've experienced something similar. Let me know in the comments if so. But when an abuser knows their victim is becoming aware, that's when things can actually get really dangerous. And the perpetrator cannot stand losing control over their long-term victim or dupe. So they do kind of panic and they become even more manipulative. And they will probably appear fine on the surface, only to be working on some other strategy beneath. And after a period of time of being unable to bait me or get me to react, the abuser went into a bit of a tailspin, which after a few weeks he started acting out and actually became violent. And also the smear campaigns were vamped up. Now these were actually looking back, I realised these were beginning to happen at this time, but I was not actually aware of smear campaigns at that moment, and it was all done secretly. So, but the priority was my safety. So this is where I required help from the police, and it was really horrible at the time and traumatic. But looking back, it was just life, or the universe, or God, whoever, was supporting me at that time, was just bringing me the support I really needed. And I felt looked after. And to be honest, I wouldn't have made it out alive without that kind of support. So creating emotional distance now also meant creating physical distance. And this is an absolute requirement for anybody who's trying to create transformation after abuse. And eventually I attained no contact. I will do another video, especially on no contact, because it's an essential part of your healing journey. So because of what I learned, that physical distance is not enough. Emotional distance has to be total. And I continued to work on creating emotional distance for quite a while after this, even though I'd left this particular person. We still feel, because of the trauma bond, we feel strongly emotionally connected to this person, even if they physically aren't there. So through meditation practice, I learned to understand the power of being present in the moment. And when I realised this, it was a really powerful tool I could use over and over again in my recovery and transformation. And your reactions to their abuses are just merely feeding the monster. And once you understand this, your recovery and transformation can be assured. And you can keep finding presence moment by moment. So once you start feeling scared or emotional, you can bring yourself back to the present moment, which is really powerful. So it's also a really important practice for creating boundaries as well, because in effect you keep creating an emotional boundary. So the other thing that helped me, that I had to start implementing as a matter of urgency really, was I had to understand about self-care and self-love. So early on in this experience, I didn't realise how important self-care and developing self-love was going to be. And I'm going to be honest, at this point, I basically had no idea about self-care, and I certainly had no idea about how to love myself. Because this is the advice often victims get given. You've got to start loving yourself. So that was a bit tough because I had no idea. The only model I had for self-love was the one of the narcissist, and I didn't want to be like that. Over time, I got to really know what this was all about. And one thing I did understand was that I had to now start acting in my own best interests and quick. And that essentially is the root of self-care and self-love, that you are able to act in your own best interests. But up until that point, for decades, I put the needs of somebody else before my own. And I was realising quickly that had really got to stop. And not just for me, but also for my children, because my children were teenagers at the time. And for anybody who's experienced abuse to the level that I did, your children are of primary concern really, because they are affected by what they've been living with. So what helped me to understand a little bit more about this was some very patient, kind soul at the time pointed out the story of the plane crash. So when you're in, or if you're in a plane crash, and you want to help people, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you can be any good to anybody else. And this story helped me understand about how I had to start putting my interests first, and that start acting in my own best interest. That was my oxygen mask, so that I could help my children, and so I could start my recovery. So and it also helped me realise that, yeah, I was in an emergency situation. Might not have been a plane crash, but it felt like I was in some sort of horrible personal ground zero, and I was in full-on survival mode. So this understanding really got me focused. So the other thing I had to do, and this is really difficult, and all of these steps are actually quite difficult, but we don't have a choice. I felt I didn't have a choice, and I just thought, if I have to, if I'm going to get better from this, I've got to do this. This is what I've got to do. So I had to acknowledge the abuse. And this was so hard. And when I realised, it was like being hit by a tsunami of grief, shame, horror, and it literally was the living nightmare that I was in. I was kind of waking up to it. And anyone else who's found themselves in this situation, you know, my heart does go out to you. It's really, really tough, but we do have to be radical about facing up to what's happened to us. And it does take a lot of processing. If you're able to follow my other video content, I'll explain more about how I process my emotional triggers relating to this kind of thing. But this work is necessary for your transformation. And I hope by this time you've understood that we do have to transform. We can't stay the way we were, because look what happened to us. So at the time I was just in survival mode, but I was on a really steep learning curve, and I went down the online rabbit hole of narcissistic abuse, and there's tons of content out there, but basically all the tick boxes of abuse I was able to check. So it was useful for that I was able to acknowledge it, but I came back out of that rabbit hole. And this is some more really important advice to you if you found yourself in this situation, that it's important to know what's happened to you in terms of abuse, but don't stay in these spaces, these narcissistic abuse spaces, for very long if you want to transform beyond narcissistic abuse, because knowing about them isn't enough to transform from the effects of abuse. Knowing about them isn't enough to save you from attracting another narcissist in the future. And what I realised was that however sadistic, cruel and appalling this person's behaviour had been toward me, just like the oxygen mask, I had to keep the focus on me if I were to stand any chance of getting out of this experience and getting some kind of quality of life back. So what did come out of this was that I was able to make a decision about what I wanted my life to be like. Because if you've lived through what you don't want, the kind of opposite spectrum on the spectrum of that is what you do want. So I remembered the voice telling me that I had to be happy in this lifetime. And so I kind of put some pieces together, and I was able to think about, well, I know what I don't want, because I didn't want this and I didn't want this. I literally had a huge tick list of things that had happened to me that I really didn't want, basically all the abuses. And I was able to reflect deeply on this, and I literally turned every abuse that I had endured into the opposite, which helped me decide what I wanted my life to be like from now on. Now, that exercise is quite tough, and but I felt I had to do it to acknowledge what had happened, but then to be able to move on from it. And I realised also that there was hardly anybody in my circle who was going to get what had been happening to me. You know, people can be sympathetic, but there's a limit to, unless they've experienced it themselves, there's a limit to how they can go into the details that you need to help you with your recovery. So for me, I was quite happy that people sort of understood what was happening, but I didn't keep going to people and venting, and I didn't go to people and tell them all the details. I kind of kept the focus on me. I thought, I've got to do this work myself. So it had to be me acting in my best interest for me. So at this point I realised, okay, I'm slightly out of my depth here to some degree, and I am going to have to get some specialist support. And I do mean specialist support, I don't mean family and friends. And if you've come through narcissistic abuse, sometimes who were your friends, and I'm sad to say, may well have been influenced by the sociopath or psychopath, and they may well be involved in some kind of smear campaign. So I learned to keep my circle very, very small because of this. I didn't feel safe with my previous contacts at all. Maybe I'll do another video about that as well if that's affected you. So what I realised though, that life was sending me support in the most dramatic and effective ways. So I mentioned before, I had the police support, I had support from witness care, I had support from social services, and because of these official methods of organisations of support, I was also able to tap into local community projects as well. So I had a lot of outreach support which I could access as well, which was very helpful. It kind of gave me a bit of a crutch to get through this time. So I was able to sort of I was able to build a new life in relative safety. In effect, no contact had been sort of put in place officially, and what I had to work on was getting this emotional distance. So I had to build my support system, and it was tricky because I didn't feel I could. The people that I thought I could trust clearly had been influenced by the narcissist, I soon realised, with one or two exceptions. And I kind of had to, and I also, because it was such a dramatic and extreme situation, I think really I accepted that I did need some professional and knowledgeable support. And I didn't really want to burden family and friends with the detail. So for your transformation, you could also build an expert support system. And I did receive some counselling and specialist support for a short while, which was kind of helpful, but I felt I needed something more. What I didn't want to do is have to go to a therapist every week and to go to CBT every week. I felt that I needed something that I could support, that I could use for myself whenever I needed. So I looked online to see what was available, and and found some extremely helpful resources and healing systems, and a fantastic support group as well. So I do recommend going out and looking for specific online courses. There are one or two sort of main influencers in this area whose focus is obviously not just knowing about narcissistic abuse, but how to rebuild your life after narcissistic abuse. And there's one or two people out there. If you Google, you can find them. But you're looking for a healing system that you can use on a self-paced basis, with a group support as well. Just a little shout out as well, if you need a safe space to hang out and get some advice, then you're more than welcome to join my Facebook group. It's very safe, it's highly moderated, and it's a great healing container for people who are on this sort of pathway. So I'll put a link in the comments. So the next thing, and I was kind of led into that pretty quickly, is that you kind of need an emotional toolkit. And I've already mentioned meditation. That is an absolute must, and that's one of the tools in my toolkit. But you need other things as well. So I learned to practice mindfulness, and that's sort of bringing your attention into the present moment. And I followed Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings and Dharma practice, which you can access online as well. But other spiritual leaders are available. But I think Eckhart Tolle is brilliant as well at teaching presence. So that's another tool in your toolkit. So the other thing I had to find out about was something called, it was a holistic thing now, that you can actually find trauma processing tools. And by tools, I mean processes and protocols that you can go and research, investigate, and see which ones sort of feel okay to use. Somebody suggested to me at the time emotional freedom technique, EFT. It's sometimes known as tapping, and that certainly is really helpful. So that would be a first, if you want to go and research this, that would be one to go and research, because that's the kind of skill you can use on yourself. You don't need to go to a therapist to use, and there's lots of excellent support actually on YouTube for that. The other thing is you may come across in the course of your research about inner child work, and this has been absolutely essential for my recovery, my fast transformation and my ongoing recovery. So inner child work is absolutely imperative, and again, there's lots of people who practice this, so I would encourage you to go and go on a research mission and discover protocols and practices that will help you connect to your inner child. It's usually done through sort of meditation or getting into different brainwave states, because this is something you have to do. When you're in your normal conscious awareness, you're thinking with your conscious survival mind, but when you're working with inner child work, you need to go into a slightly more receptive brainwave state, theta brainwaves, alpha brainwaves, that sort of thing. So go and investigate, see what you can find. I've got various tools that I use. I do occasionally go to a therapist who uses biodynamic breath release, so breath work's very good as well, because trauma is stored in our body. That's the subject for another video, but go out and get yourself toolkits, investigate what you can use easily, because you're going to need them. You're going to need to use them on a daily basis. So once I got a reasonable collection of tools in my toolkit, I was able to process my own trauma, and I was able to respond to emotional triggers which come up thick and fast in this situation. You've got to know how to deal with the triggers. You can't push them down and ignore them. They are coming up for your attention, and this is why you need your toolkit. So I still do this work to this day. It's not something that you can, in your early days when you're in survival mode, you need to do this all the time basically. But now, sort of few years down the line, sort of in maintenance mode, but I would never not do this work. But it's brought fantastic, amazing benefits and miracles into my life. So although you might be in survival now, it won't always be like this. You will get into maintenance mode, but you must work on your traumas. Okay, so the next thing is to understand how the trauma bond works. Now, there's lots of angles to this, and I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a psychiatrist, but the one thing that I've used to help me understand it and not beat myself up about it is understanding the physiology of the hormones that are released in your body which form the trauma bond and their effects on you, because it is a physical hormonal reaction which creates emotional connections to the abuser. So in some ways it seems like, I'm trauma bonded, there's nothing I can do. There is loads of things you can do about this. So I'm glad you're watching this video, because you'll get exactly the advice you'll need on this particular point. So I'm going to use an analogy here. So we are connected to emotionally and very strongly to the perpetrator, and it seems mad. It's like people on the outside of this go, well, why do you love them so much when they behave like that to you? And it is crazy, isn't it? It doesn't make any, rationally it makes no sense, but physically and emotionally it does, and I'll explain why. So I want you to think about a crack addict. And a crack addict has such a strong connection to crack. It's physical, it's emotional. They can't live without it. And yeah, it's an addiction, isn't it? So in the way that a crack addict loves crack, we loved our abuser. And we do have to question the word love here. We feel such a strong emotional connection and such a strong physical connection that we are a little bit confused about what actually love is. It's not love, it's a chemical addiction to this person. So I hope that helps. And when you know that you're dealing with an addiction, we can hope, maybe, I mean, I have been addicted to things in the past like smoking and that sort of thing, and I've overcome that. So it's been able to overcome an addiction. So anything that you can do to overcome that addiction, which can be done, you just have to be focused, and even thinking about the abuser is enough to start a reaction of wanting it, in much the same way that a crack addict will start to think about crack, will then want crack. So you kind of have to see it in exactly those terms. So this chemical reaction, this addiction, is the basis of the abuse cycle. It keeps us hooked in, wanting to go back for more and more. And if you think about it, a crack addict gets high on crack and then doesn't have crack and then wants to have a bit more crack, and so the subject of the addiction, they have to build it up. They have to have more of the thing they're addicted to every time, and that's how it spirals and gets really fixed. And that's also the cycle of the abuse cycle. Also, we are sort of trained to want more of being stuck in the cycle. So if we can develop an awareness of what's going on for us at this level, it really does help us to manage what is happening to us emotionally and physically. So if you'd like to know more about how to work with me, then click any of the links below. And if you'd like some expert support, then, as I mentioned before, we have a safe space in Facebook. Why not consider joining? Okay, that's it from me. Bye-bye.